Okay, so welcome back to this video in which we are discussing the function of the basal ganglia. Okay, right. So, here's the putamen here, now drawn. Okay, and then we've got the caudate, remember, looping round like this, lateral to the thalamus. Okay, so like that. So let's colour these in. So the putamen we'll have in red here. So this is the putamen here, and then we'll have to draw the caudate in violet purple, I think, so that it actually shows up over the green of the thalamus. Okay, so here is the caudate nucleus, sitting around the side of the thalamus. Okay, so there we go. Right, so what's going to happen is basically when the prefrontal cortex, which we'll show here, and we'll show the supplementary motor area sitting there as well. So when the prefrontal cortex, which we'll have in blue here, prefrontal cortex, when this sends the command to the supplementary motor area to make a motor plan, so it sends the command to the supplementary motor area, the SMA here, and this is the prefrontal cortex, often abbreviated to PFC for short. So when it sends this command to the supplementary motor area, consecutively, it sends a command to the caudate nucleus, or the caudate putamen as it's often called. So the combined name for the caudate and the putamen, we have already seen you can call that the striatum, but often people will just call it the caudate putamen as one word, basically. So the caudate putamen, maybe. Okay, but this basically is the striatum. So it will send a command to the striatum to say, okay, you need to do something. You need to let this motor command that the supplementary motor area sends to M1, you need to let this go through. Okay? So it's going to tell the caudate putamen it wants this motor command that's going between the supplementary motor area and the primary motor cortex. It wants it to be allowed to go through, basically. Okay, now we've seen that this cannot go through because the internal globus pallidus is continuously inhibiting the thalamus. So let's draw this other picture here, which is where we view the thalami from above, basically, and we've got the midbrain underneath, and then on the sides we have the putamen and the globus pallidus on the side here. So here are these structures. I'm going to make this slightly bigger. So we'll have this as the putamen as this outer structure. Okay. And then we'll divide the globus pallidus into the internal globus pallidus and the external globus pallidus. So the internal globus pallidus is often abbreviated to the IGP, the internal globus pallidus, and then external globus pallidus will abbreviate to EGP. Okay, and we've drawn everything so far for the left half of the brain. We're viewing the brain from the left-hand side here, so we should stick to that convention, and we'll say this is the left half of the brain here. So this is the internal globus pallidus here, external globus pallidus here, okay, and this is the putamen here. Okay, so let's colour these in so that we know what we're talking about. Oh, and the thalamus is in the middle, of course. So I will colour the thalamus in turquoise again. Okay. And now we'll have the internal globus pallidus in orange here. So this is the internal globus pallidus in orange. We'll only colour in one side. Then in this pink colour here, not vivid purple but pink, is the external globus pallidus, and then finally in green we'll have the putamen here. Okay, right. So, the putamen should have been in red. Never mind. I'll try and repair that damage actually. Otherwise, it will get quite confusing if we're not using consistent colours. There we go, red. So, basically, we know that in order to take this, in order to allow this motor command, this motor plan to go between the supplementary motor area into the primary motor cortex, we need the thalamus basically to be giving the cerebral cortex the okay. So the thalamus has the power to say, yes, let this go past. Now, the internal globus pallidus is continuously stopping the thalamus from doing that, so that the supplementary motor area doesn't send through any old motor plan into the primary motor cortex. Now, when the caudate putamen, or the striatum here, receives information from the prefrontal cortex that says, allow this motor plan to go through, then what it's going to do is it's going to work through two pathways. Now, the first is called the direct pathway, so I'll start with that one. The first thing that's going to happen is basically the caudate putamen up here, the striatum, or I could have drawn it coming from here actually, but since I've got the full thing, the full striatum drawn on this picture, I'll show it coming from here. Okay, the striatum is going to inhibit the internal globus pallidus, and then the internal globus pallidus is going to stop inhibiting the thalamus, and if the internal globus pallidus stops inhibiting the thalamus can then send the OK that allows this motor plan to go between the supplementary motor area and the primary motor cortex, and therefore allows you to actually initiate the motor plan. So, this is known as the direct pathway. Okay? Right. Now, it also acts through something known as the indirect pathway. And to understand the indirect pathway, we're going to have to put on our diagram as well, we're going to have to put the subthalamic nucleus. So let's draw another picture here where we have the thalamus, and then we'll have this little structure underneath the thalamus before you get to the midbrain there. And that's an over-exaggeration, it's not perched on there. But that little structure that I've drawn in between the midbrain and the thalamus, this is supposed to represent the subthalamic nucleus. Okay, so in orange here, let's have the midbrain. Okay, so I'll show, actually I won't put it on that picture, I'll just make it more messy. Here's the thalamus in turquoise. Okay, and then the subthalamic nucleus is in yellow here. Okay, right. Now, basically, the subthalamic nucleus continuously is activating the internal globus pallidus. So remember, the internal globus pallidus is continuously inactivating the thalamus and therefore stopping the motor plans from getting from the supplementary motor area to the primary motor cortex. The subthalamic nucleus is also involved in that by activating the internal globus pallidus. So, if we want to reduce the activity of the internal globus pallidus, we could either work through the direct pathway and actually directly inhibit the internal globus pallidus, or we could inhibit the subthalamic nucleus, and that would indirectly inhibit the internal globus pallidus, since the subthalamic nucleus activates the internal globus pallidus and is continuously activating the internal globus pallidus. Now, the external globus pallidus, here in pink, that actually does inhibit the subthalamic nucleus. Okay? But usually, the caudate putamen is inhibiting the external globus pallidus. Okay, so let me say this again. The external globus pallidus inhibits the subthalamic nucleus, which effectively stops motor plans from going from the supplementary motor area to the M1. But usually, the caudate putamen here, okay, whoops, how am I going to show this? The caudate putamen, I could have just shown it from the putamen on that diagram, but I'm drawing it all the way from here. So this striatum usually inhibits the external globus pallidus. However, if it stops inhibiting the external globus pallidus, then the external globus pallidus will gain activity, okay, and then it will inhibit the subthalamic nucleus. And since the subthalamic nucleus stops motor plans from going from the supplementary motor area to the primary motor cortex, this will have the effect of also allowing our motor plan to go through. Now, so if the prefrontal cortex has sent us instructions, has sent the caudate putamen the instructions that it wants this motor plan to go through from the supplementary motor area to the primary motor cortex, then we will need to inactivate this pathway here. We'll need to inactivate the inactivation of the external globus pallidus. So this is what's known as the indirect pathway. Okay, so when the prefrontal cortex tells the caudate putamen, it wants this motor plan to go through. The caudate putamen will increase its inactivation of the internal globus pallidus and decrease its inactivation of the external globus pallidus. By increasing its inactivation of the internal globus pallidus, the so-called direct pathway, it will stop the internal globus pallidus from inactivating the thalamus, and then the thalamus will send the instruction to the cerebral cortex that says, okay, let this motor plan go through. Okay? By decreasing its inactivation of the external globus pallidus, it means that the external globus pallidus activity goes up. The external globus pallidus then inhibits the subthalamic nucleus, and since the subthalamic nucleus activates the internal globus pallidus, inactivating the subthalamic nucleus leads to an inactivation of the internal globus pallidus. And now we're back to the same thing that the direct pathway achieved. By inactivating the internal globus pallidus, you stop the inactivation of the thalamus, so the thalamus activity goes up, which leads to the OK signal going to the cerebral cortex that allows the motor plan to go from the supplementary motor area to the primary motor cortex. So basically, all of this apparatus here is involved in controlling this gate, basically, controlling whether motor plans can go from the supplementary motor area to the primary motor cortex. And if this apparatus degenerates, which is one of the first things that happens in Huntington's disease, these structures go first. The striatum goes, okay? And basically, what can then happen is you can, for instance, if the internal globus pallidus degenerates, then it will no longer inhibit the thalami, okay? And the thalami will just let through any old motor plan from the supplementary motor area to the primary motor cortex, and that's what causes chorea in Huntington's disease. That's what causes these involuntary movements that resemble dancing to happen all the time, because there is no gate stopping these sort of practiced motor plans that the supplementary motor area is making from actually being enacted. Okay, so I hope you've learnt a lot from this video.